Our gospel reading this morning comes to us from the Gospel of John. Jesus said, "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you, and your joy may be complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servants do not know what the master is doing, but I have called you friends. Because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask him in my name. I am giving you these commandments, so that you may love one another. I am a failure at prayer. So writes Episcopal priest Barbara Brown Taylor. But I have to confess, so am I. Like Taylor, I have more books on prayer and spiritual practices in my library than I know what to do with, or, if we're being honest, that I've read. I've even taken classes and led workshops on spiritual practices, but nothing I try seems to stick for any longer than a few weeks at best. But I am, it seems, especially bad at silence and sitting still. Last year I attended a workshop on centering prayer during a day-long retreat. It's a lovely practice, in theory. You sit there in silence, eyes closed, doing and thinking about nothing for 10, 20 minutes, just dwelling in the presence of God. It sounds lovely. All I could think of, when will this be over? Abide in my love, Jesus says in today's gospel. It's so simple, deceptively so, just to abide, dwell, sit, be in the promise and presence of the love of Jesus. But we don't seem to do this abiding in love thing very well, do we? Sure, we like to talk about it. We might even sing, "Jesus loves me, this I know," in Sunday school. But when it comes to actually practicing it and living it, I think more often than not we fail to fully realize just how profound of a promise that really is. So what gets in the way of abiding in the love of Jesus? On the one hand, I think there are the things that we do to ourselves. We don't let ourselves abide in that love. Maybe we don't think we're worthy enough of Jesus' love, or that we don't deserve it, distrusting the promise of God, or doubting our own self-worth. Or maybe we just don't have enough time to abide, to dwell, to sit, to just be. Ours is a culture that is so often individualistic and competitive and consumer-driven and fast-paced, and where our worth is determined more by how much we can accomplish and how quickly, and not simply for who we are as human beings. In her poem, aptly titled Prayer, the poet Marie Howe captures this perpetual dilemma. Some of those lines she writes go like this: "Every day I want to speak with you, and every day something more important calls for my attention. Even now I can hardly sit here. Why do I flee from you? Even as I write these words, I am planning to rise from the chair as soon as I finish this sentence. There's always something more important, or so it seems. Things that call us away and that make it impossible to just sit and be, to abide in the love of Jesus. Distractions about growing to-do lists, worries about getting everything done just right, tending to strained or broken relationships with friends or family, anxiety over illness or unemployment, or any number of things. But there are two sides to every coin. Not only do we have a problem abiding in this love ourselves, but I think we project that onto others. We don't let others abide in the love of God. And we especially haven't done a very good job of proclaiming that as the church. Sure, we might say all are welcome, but do we really mean that all the time? All are welcome, except those people. People we'd rather not think about, let alone have sit next to us in the pews, whose views or identities differ from what we believe or think is acceptable. People that we ourselves have determined are somehow outside the bounds of being able to abide in the love of Jesus. And so we set up these walls and these systems of exclusion and oppression. Recently, for a class, I've been reading a collection of writings by Joel Workin. Joel was a seminary student at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary in Berkeley during the height of the AIDS crisis in the 1980s. In a sermon he preached to his internship congregation during that time, Joel addressed head-on the widespread misconception that persons living with AIDS were somehow something to be afraid of and to be avoided at all costs. Those people, he writes in his sermon, like the tax collectors and sinners that Jesus dared to eat with, much to the chagrin of the Pharisees. And so such persons faced a very real sense of alienation, and perhaps most especially in the church. They were given messages that they don't belong. You are somehow outside of the bounds of abiding in the love of Jesus and in our community. And so in the midst of this, Joel's prophetic word in that sermon was profound. Persons living with AIDS were not people to be afraid of. He writes in his sermon, we don't need to run away. We must stay with them, eat with them, just as Jesus ate with those people. It's just one example, but Joel's sermon highlights that exclusion and alienation are not the message of Jesus. It's not the message we read in this gospel. Not for persons living with AIDS at the height of the epidemic. Not for anyone told by the church they are less than. Not for anyone who feels for any reason that they are undeserving or don't have time for abiding in the love of Jesus. Abide in my love is a promise, plain and simple, no strings attached. It is the assurance of Jesus' promise to be with us, no matter what. Jesus' words in this gospel reading come at the heart of what biblical scholars have called the farewell discourse. Jesus' last words to his disciples before he would be betrayed and put on trial and sentenced to death. Already at this point in the gospel, the disciples knew that one of them would betray Jesus. And they're getting the sense now that things are picking up, that the hour when Jesus will leave them is getting closer. But Jesus meets their anxiety with a word of reassurance. He calls them friends for the first time. A new way of understanding the fellowship and the community that they all shared together. A sense of mutual dependence and trust for getting through life in Jesus' absence. Friends, Jesus says, I chose you. Reminiscent of Jesus' earlier call to the 12 disciples, but here a reminder of that chosenness. Or in one paraphrase of this verse that I read this week, you are here with me. Now is not the time to wonder whether or not you should be here, are meant to be here, are worthy to be here. You are simply here. Friends, chosen by Jesus, who exist in a community of love, rooted first in the love between Jesus and his Father, extending ever outward as a great act of intimacy between God and all of us. This is what it means to abide in the love of Jesus. It requires nothing from us. We love because God first loved us. God's love flows to us and through us and from us, pouring out into the world in abundance. In John's gospel, from the very beginning, we hear the promise of abiding in love. From the Word made flesh, the Word who makes his dwelling among us, the Word who abides with us and we in him. Over and over, the promise of love is not an abstract concept, but a real, tangible experience. We feel the water on our forehead from the font. We taste the bread and wine at this table. We hear the word proclaimed in our midst. We experience the presence of our neighbors in community. In all of this, we receive the invitation and the promise of the risen Christ. Abide in my love. Just be, just as you are. No strings attached. Thanks be to God. And so we abide in that love at this table every week. We abide